Claudia, for those who haven't come across you online, introduce yourself and tell the listeners why we're talking today.
My name is Claudia Cometa. I am a pharmacist by trade. And although I don't work in traditional pharmacy setting now, I still maintain my multiple state licenses. And I graduated back in 2003. So worked for over a decade and a half-ish, mostly in clinical pharmacy. So mostly in ambulatory care. I worked alongside physicians in outpatient clinics. I also managed some anticoagulation clinics. So that was most of my experience. And I sort of switched courses after my father was diagnosed with lymphoma in 2016 and became his advocate. Nobody else in my family was really medically trained to do it. And so I took on that role happily, but also found out a lot of things about the medical system that I think I was either blinded to or didn't open my eyes to or didn't understand, realized how deeply broken it is, and decided that I am better utilized in this world to function as an advocate for others as I advocated for him. So, I'm here to kind of just explain my experience, hopefully inspire others to think a little bit outside of the box as far as transferable skills, as we are pharmacists and have many of those, and it doesn't have to look like somebody else's journey.
What was the main thing lacking in your care for your dad?
So what I saw along his journey was, it would almost look like neglect, although I actually trust in my husband's a physician. So I trust in the caliber of person who chooses to go into medical school. And I believe that as a whole, they're going into it for the right reason. They're intelligent, very capable, hardworking, strong ethic type of people. But the system itself is not supporting them to be able to be the providers that they can and should be. And so there's a lot of shortcuts. I saw him go into the pulmonologist's office, and I saw, the fellow evaluate him, say, report on the default template of the SOAP note that all was well and his lungs looked clear, when he really didn't actually listen to his lungs. And then I saw the attending come in and sign off on what the fellow did. And then I saw him go in to get a chest tube 2 days later. And so these things just continue to go on and on and on as I'm watching and paying attention, and I'm watching a inaccurate documentation of his weight being put down as 300 pounds when he was actually on a good day 170. And when you're in the middle of chemo and that's weight-based, that's a problem. And so just error after error, even with my oversight, even with my extreme oversight. So it was shocking to me, honestly, because I always, I think we as healthcare professionals pride ourselves on being detail oriented. And although we also realize that we're humans, we do the best we can to pay attention to all the details. And I think even as pharmacists, we take the type A up even a notch further. And so it was shocking to me how much was going wrong.
That almost sounds like the game, like telephone. I mean, so you're saying that the first guy went in with the SOAP notes. That's the acronym for subjective, objective, something or other, right?
Yeah, assessment plan.
He didn't even do those, and then the next guy come in and thought he did them and didn't do them?
Yeah, what happens with documentation and electronic medical record in an outpatient setting, well, inpatient too, but in an outpatient setting, is the tech gurus on the other end of creating these amazing electronic medical record systems produce them so that they can be efficient. Part of their efficiency is an auto population of what you are typically saying. So, okay, lungs are clear to auscultation and, yada, 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 and that will auto populate. You have to be the person to go in and say, that's not the case with this patient. And so it lends itself to problems because of the auto population of what is normally being stated in that specific scenario.
It's kind of like when you put your name in something and it pulls up your maybe past computer stuff and it populates everything. But that's a problem. And I imagine that's the upper echelon coming down and saying, hurry up, let's get this going. We're going to auto-populate this. But they don't go through every question like they should, right? They assume that if A is here, that all the rest are going to follow. And that's not the case in the real world.
Right. And it's really easy to go through your chart and just, okay, let me just put a few notes. All of this auto-populates. and you don't go back and actually fix the things from that auto population that do not apply to this patient, well, then you're the fellow, the attending pulmonologist comes in after you, assuming you did what you said on that auto-populated chart.
They're not assuming that it's all auto-populated. They think you went through and looked at it.
Correct. Yeah. So they assume that that's accurate. And I mean, ultimately, you're a pulmonologist, like if you don't listen to lungs, that's probably a problem.
Yeah, right.
You have a very niched job. So, I had a very long conversation with the attending. It went a little bit ugly.
That's okay when it's your family. Well, it's okay a lot of times, but it's okay when it's your family for sure.
Yeah. So, and it was a difficult year, but what I would say is I needed to see all of that, to see really what was going on, because, I would sit and I would manage my anticoagulants and I would feel like I'm doing a good job, and, hooray for clinical pharmacists. And I believe that we do, I think pharmacists in general do really fantastic work. We're just one part of a system that is overall extremely broken. And I just felt that my skill set, my knowledge, my passion, and my hope to help others through that very difficult situation. As I'm looking around the ICU bay, I'm looking at room to room to room, and I'm thinking, who's helping this person, and who's watching out for this person's chart, and who's looking at this person's labs, and who's questioning these things for these patients? Nobody's there. So I just decided to change courses. I still maintain my pharmacy licenses from the states that I've practiced in. And so it's not a renunciation of pharmacy, but more just an expansion of what we're able to do.
If you were a pharmacist up there, you probably wouldn't have had the chance to see the stuff in your dad's notes, because a pharmacist, I take it, maybe don't look that deeply. And if you weren't a pharmacist or in the medical profession, you may not have had enough skills to know that something was being passed over. You might not know the guy was doing autofill or something like that. Is that right? So
100%.
Both of those would have been missed, even as a pharmacist and even as a family member. Is that right?
100%. Yeah. If I was, in the pharmacy looking just on paper, I might have caught the 300-pound error only because I know he's not 300 pounds.
Right.
But if I was a pharmacist not knowing the person personally, I would have no idea that was an error unless I, was able to look back and see a pattern of like, okay, I'm pretty sure he didn't gain 130 pounds in a week. So that's probably an error. But other than that, no, I wouldn't have been in the office to know that documentation and that auto-populated note was inaccurate. There would have been no way for me to know that. And as a non-medical professional, there would have been no way for me to know any of that. I would have had no way to know really anything that I caught. I wouldn't have known what questions to ask, what to look for, to even look at the online portal to know that a error was made in his weight. So no, I wouldn't have known any of that.
Well, you might have had a premonition or an inkling, maybe as a family member, but probably not. But you might have picked up, like if someone had a stained shirt that wasn't changed in a day or two, but you're not going to pick up that other stuff.
Yeah. It's a lot. And it's so much that it's so overwhelming for me as a healthcare professional to see it. I can only imagine how overwhelming it is for the person who's sick, who can't really even process, more than 5 words during an appointment because they aren't feeling well. And then they're also supposed to somehow be so proactive in their care that they have to now know everything to be able to catch errors. I mean, the assumption is I am going to the authority who has systems in place to prevent these errors and knows enough to help me. I shouldn't have to do all of this. It's like if I'm buying from Amazon, I shouldn't have to worry about whether my 2-day Prime, that's your job as the company. It's your job as the healthcare professional, as the physician, to provide me this level of care in a safe way. And so so it's a lot. It's a lot, and people don't realize how really broken it is.
If you don't know, you don't know. But I think a lot of people may not have all the skills that you would have, but they'd have some of them just to know that something doesn't seem right. They maybe even can't put words to it.
Yeah.
When you say it's a systems problem, whenever I think of the system, I always think of the man. I don't even know who the man is, but I always think of the man, like the upper echelon, like managers and the owner of the hospital and things like that. Now, I suppose someone else could argue, they could say, no, the system is just when a lot of people get together and there's no real manager, but the system breaks down, kind of like the telephone game I was mentioning. In your mind, though, when you talk about the system breaking down, is there any place, and not that we're here just to throw blame around, we're here because you're a solutions person, but where does this start breaking down in your mind?
So many places. I would argue that there are few places that it's not broken down. Where did it begin is hard to say. It's kind of like chicken and egg, but I'll say that it begins as early in the training of medical professionals as the schooling. I think about the culture in medical school. I mean, I basically, my husband and I have been together ever since high school. So we've been through all of it. So I've been through the medical schooling. I know.
What type of physician is he?
He's an anesthesiologist now. So
anesthesiologist. Okay.
Yeah. But so I went through the whole process with him, and I saw the types of, the culture that is promoted in medicine. And it's very similar and parallel, honestly, to the schooling I had in pharmacy school. So there is, an underlying assumption, in this current time that we're in, that medications are there to solve all problems. And it is very medication heavy. So in pharmacy school, we used to role play, and I've talked about this on my podcast. We used to role play, if somebody comes in and wants to take a supplement, here's how you're going to tell them not to. Here's how you're going to tell them that the FDA doesn't regulate that and this isn't good for you. But here, this other drug is really great for you. So how about you ask your doctor for this instead? So, we role play these things, and there's this indoctrination of the way that we should think as pharmacists. In a very similar and paralleled way in medical school, there's this indoctrination of the way that you should think as a doctor, and you diagnose X condition, and here are the medications that you would prescribe for X condition. And again, supplements are not, this is all quackery. You're never going to recommend acupuncture or chiropractor. These things are all, there's no science to back that up. So you're indoctrinated into thinking in a very specific way. You're molded into this system. Okay. So as you come into the field, I just want to help somebody. I had this amazing experience as a kid, where my mom was diagnosed with something scary, and I just want to be that person to help others. They come in with amazing stories of why they want to help others. And then this molding starts to happen through school. And then you go into residency, and there's just this, work until you can't, breathe or see or anything anymore. Like, you don't get to eat lunch. You don't get to go to the bathroom. And so, and that makes you tough, that makes you strong. And so there's this indoctrination of mindset around what, a healthcare professional is, what a physician is. A physician just pushes through, and the system isn't here to support you. You're here to support your patients at all costs, at the cost of your own self-care, right? So I didn't usually go to the bathroom when I worked. I worked in retail a little bit, and bathroom was a luxury. So there's just this continued verbiage and culture that surrounds medicine. And ultimately, we are not meant to sustain a life of not going to the bathroom and not hydrating ourselves and not taking care of ourselves and then being able to somehow pour into our patients. We can't do it. It's just it's not human to do that. Yeah. So eventually we break down as people. The system continues to support this culture that isn't sustainable, and everything breaks down. And then, of course, outside of just the culture of that, then there is a whole problem with, the payer system and insurances, making decisions, insurances fueling and informing the decisions that go into the costs of things. There's big pharma, there's just a lot of things. And I'm not against all of that. I think there could be roles for those things. Obviously, there are life-saving medications. So I'm not saying that we should renounce all medications. But there are so many pieces of this that have problems. And so the entire system.
I think the enlightening part, well, to me, and I think what we all have to understand is, even if schools change, let's say schools changed overnight and didn't force us as hard, or let's say the upper ranks didn't push as hard, our comrades still may push us as hard just because that's the culture. And that could last for another 50 years until some of that dies out. We can find fault in our own profession, we're all pushing each other probably.
100%. Well, we've all been indoctrinated, right? And as it gets a little bit, even in medicine, it's like it gets a little bit easier for the residents because there's new rules about how many hours you can work, well, then the old school docs are like, well, in my day, in my day.
You're sissies then.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't even, we walked 10 miles in the snow before we even got to work at 5 a.m. or whatever. And we worked 36-hour shifts. You guys get off in 24 hours. That's insane, and so it trickles. So you're right. It will take many generations to start to shift. And it is shifting because there are much more tolerable rules right now for medical residents than there were when my husband was a resident. And when his dad was a doctor, I mean, you just would sleep in the hospital for a week. So it has gotten better, but it will take many generations to wash that out.
When you get that upper level saying, not these words, but you guys are sissies, you're not doing what we did. It almost seems it goes underground then, where people are like, well, we'll do this private hazing like they do in the fraternities and stuff, because we're not going to be called sissies by those guys. I don't know how you would force extra work on yourself, but when your parent and grandparents are saying that stuff to you, you got to say, well, it's still tough because we do this, so you got to find something to make it sound like you're not taking care of yourself, I guess,
Right.
You can be as miserable as they were. We'll show you.
Yeah. Well, and this is a much larger societal problem. I mean, what is, glamorized and encouraged and acknowledged and validated is working yourself to death. There's, if you have openings on your schedule and you might be taking, 15 minutes to meditate or to take care of yourself, what are you doing? Are you even, a productive member of society? And this is a much larger societal issue, but it's even more exaggerated in the medical field.
You're with your dad. Your dad is getting sicker. When did you then make the move to this? Was it a look back at what your dad went through, or was it during that situation that you said, I'm going to try to broaden this out and make a bigger impact on this?
Good question. We moved back to Florida from Washington State in 2016, and I didn't immediately seek a job when we first moved. And it was very shortly thereafter that my father got diagnosed. And so I kind of, we just made some budgetary changes, and I kind of just took that on as my full-time job for a little bit. And then I just realized I was driving back and forth. So my parents lived in Orlando, which is 2 hours south of where I live. And so I would drive back and forth just constantly trying to be at appointments and et cetera. And, one day it was probably 3/4 of the way in through that year, it was pouring. I just remembered it was pouring down rain, and all of a sudden it was like just this, I have to do this for somebody else. I know, I knew already at that point that the likelihood that my father would make it through was very low. And I was like, okay, well, when this chapter is over, which I know I'm going to go through some, pretty deep grieving process over it. What am I going to do with his legacy? What am I going to do with the knowledge that I have gained? How can I serve others in the way that I served him? And so it was like, I have to do this for others. I don't know what that looks like. I didn't even know to call it a patient advocate. I don't think at really any point in time I labeled it as I was being his patient advocate. Yeah. I just was helping him on his journey. And so I was like, I just know that this is what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what that looks like. I just know that that's what feels right to me. And so, I had moved forward very imperfectly because at no point in my pharmacy training was I taught how to start a business that is shifting a little bit. There's pieces of pharmacy school that kind of at least expose you to that, but I had zero exposure, zero knowledge of how to start a business, especially when it wasn't technically pharmacy. I mean, I'm not really functioning as a pharmacist. So, I just was like, I don't really know how to do any of the back end stuff, but I know what I'm doing as far as the trenches. And so I'm just going to ask my sister to help me build a website who's in tech. I was just being resourceful, and I moved forward very imperfectly.
When you moved to Florida, you were 2 hours away from your dad.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you choose that area instead of not right up close to him? Because how many times a week were you going back to see him or going down to see him?
We were called back to Florida. We actually were fine in Washington State. We were, but my husband trained here in Gainesville, and the hospital here called him back. They were expanding, and we got the call, and we were like, all right, well, this must be the sign that we got to go back. Yeah.
So at that time, you're saying, well, being 2 hours away is better than 2 days of flying away almost.
For sure. 100%. Yeah. I was not working during that time, which was fantastically timed, and very, divine intervention type of thing. And I also acknowledge and validate that I was blessed that my husband had a job that would be able to support that. I realize, and that not everybody has that flexibility in their financial space.
Did you have enough access with your dad legally? Were you like his legal medical power of attorney and all that stuff? Were you all that already or not?
Yeah. So my mom was, but she was always there with me. So we kind of left it for her to sort of be the decision maker. And then I just kind of took over. So I was at the appointments more than she was. And by about a month in, everybody pretty much had my picture plastered everywhere. They knew that they were to call me. I mean, it was like no question that I was the force running the show. And a lot of times they didn't necessarily like that, but
Was that hard for you ever to know that you had to be the bulldog sometimes? Did you always take pride in it? Did it ever affect you like that you were pulled between saying, I've got to say this and do what's right for my dad, and these people might not like that? And what was your emotions with that? Did that hurt you? Did it empower you?
Yeah, so my mom's side is Italian, and that's kind of in us. So that part was not difficult for me. However, if that's not a personality type somebody sort of claims, that can be very difficult because it really is that the loudest person wins. It's unfortunate, but the reality is the system is so overburdened and overloaded that you kind of have to speak up. And so, I started out pretty nice. I'll always start out with a very amicable relationship. I like to have a good relationship with my medical team. But I also realize that there are times when things have to get a little bit more aggressive. And many times it did. I ended up firing both hospital systems in Orlando and moved him up to Gainesville. And if I, it doesn't really matter if I had done that earlier, but, I wish I would have been able to talk him into that earlier, but he was wanting to stay in the area and Orlando just wasn't serving him. But you have to be willing to, as a person advocating for yourself and as a person advocating for a loved one, you have to be willing to part ways with a medical team that isn't serving you and a facility that isn't serving you. And I think that's hard for people because they feel a sense of, loyalty. This person knows my chart, this person, and it's hard to reestablish with somebody. And it just seems overwhelming. But you really have to get into a mindset that this is like any other service. It's anything else that you're purchasing as a consumer. You're purchasing a service, and if the service is not serving you, you have to be in the mindset to be able to switch. Is
that like changing a legal team where you have to make a big thing? Or when you say you fired them, is there anything official for that when someone's in the system, or you just say, instead of going to here next week, we're not going to go there, we're going to go up to Gainesville? Is it official, or do you just go?
I think it's respectful to let the provider know that you're leaving. Would you have to? No, you could just not show. I don't think that it's in anybody's best interest to have just a kind of That's
what all my former girlfriends did to me.
There was no chart though. Just memory. Just your heart and your head.
Hopefully not. I don't know. It hasn't come out yet, but God only knows.
You could just bail. You could just go MIA. But, just like when if you leave a hospital, it's never a good thing to have in your chart that you just bailed and didn't show up to an appointment, or,
gotcha.
You want to have some documentation that, that I'm just letting you know this isn't working out. I've chosen to move providers. The reality is a lot of people treat it just like you said. They treat it like it's going to be a breakup. It's going to be this big thing and there's going to be this animosity. And the reality is the providers, it's not that they don't care. They don't have the time to be putting any energy into worrying about why you moved on. I mean, maybe a newer practitioner who doesn't have a big, patient panel might spend a little bit of time thinking about it, but it's not, you don't need to worry about that. You respectfully, we're leaving, we're moving to a different hospital system, I'm moving to a different provider, and I'm just letting you know, please document that on my chart, so it's not like she just fell off. I mean, she had this appointment, and that's just, and that doesn't look good for anybody. It doesn't look good to the insurance side. It just doesn't look good. So yeah, but it's not a big thing. It's not, and I think that's part of and I'm glad that you brought that up, because I do think that people think it has to be this big scene, and it's not a scene at all. It's just, I'm letting you know that this relationship isn't working out, and it ultimately is a relationship. And just like any other relationship, if it's not working out, you just move on.
I grew up kind of more as a people pleaser, and I still kind of have that in me, believe it or not. Everybody says, how can that asshole be a people pleaser? Just those two just don't line up for me. But there's a difference in telling somebody this relationship's not working out versus we've chosen to take a different road with this. Because on the first one, it's more like, oh, the relationship didn't work out, what happened? And the second one, if you say, and you said it just a minute ago, like we've decided to go with a different system or something like that, one is almost a little bit more personable, like the relationship broke down, and one's just like, we're moving. Do you think it's important to actually give that of saying the relationship didn't work out? Or can you just say, no, we're just moving, and let them think that it's because you've decided to move closer to family or this and that? Do you think it's good to like express as much as you feel comfortable with?
I would never want them to think that that everything was going well and the only reason that we're moving is because we're moving away. They need to know that there was somebody who was dissatisfied. Now, what they want to do with that, I will say, close to 100% of the time, nothing will happen with that. It will just get documented. The physician, most likely you will send this note. You could send the note via a portal to the actual physician, which will be seen by the nurse. But the times that a physician will actually read that and somehow process it and worry about it is probably zero. So it's not. It's more just for documentation that the clinic knows, like, oh, okay, what happened to that person? Oh, yeah, okay, they went somewhere else, done. Like, there will be close to zero hard feelings. They won't care. It's not that they don't care because they're not caring people. There's a million other patients. They're so overloaded that if you decided to go get care somewhere else, there's not going to be an exit interview. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And that's an unfortunate thing, because that would actually be nice if somebody said, hey, this person decided to leave. Let's go to this department and see if we can find out what went wrong, because then maybe we can improve. I mean, that would be like some kind of utopia compared to what's happening now. But I wouldn't lie to make it seem prettier or less harsh. I would just say, I haven't been happy. Honestly, I haven't been happy with the care there. I've decided to move my care and establish my care elsewhere. It's not a relationship that I think is serving either of us. So I'm moving on. And whoever's taking the message will say, okay, thanks for letting us know. And that will be the end of that.
Yeah, they don't care. They don't care. Yeah. I mean, I see it as a, independent pharmacy. When I'm dealing directly with the people, that's one thing. And I've known their family for years and stuff, but the people don't care. They just want to chart it correctly and move on.
Right. And you want the chart to be accurate, because you'll be shocked at how many inaccuracies, will be in there about what you've said or didn't say. And you'll be like, what? I don't, and so you want to have that documented correctly about why you left.
You're a couple hours away from your dad. You're doing more and more of this. So when do you make your first move to say, I could do this for somebody else? I know you said you were kind of thinking how this might impact others. When did that thought get stronger?
So he passed away April 15th of that year. And I honestly, beginning of April, started to make small plans. I just started to say, okay, well, what name would feel good to me? I just took very, very small baby steps, because I knew that I was going to need some space to grieve. But I also felt, as the default type A that I am, that I wanted to get the ball rolling, even though it was rolling so slow, but I wanted it to at least start going in the right direction. So, what name would I like, and what would I like my, colors to represent to somebody? I was really into sort of just this peace, the sense of peace around the whole process and the journey, because I really had very little peace in it, and so did my dad. So I just, small changes, small decision making, like, okay, now I'll look for the URL to buy, and okay, now I'll, small steps. And then after he died, I took off, it's several weeks to just kind of like breathe through that. And then once I kind of felt ready to take on some clients, I, made sure that my website was live, and that I had a contract in place, that I legally needed. And, I got onto a nationwide database where people, if they were to search, health advocate or patient advocate, or they even knew to use those words, they would come across a database, and I was vetted and put on that. And so pretty quickly I was able to help another family in a tough situation, and it was so fulfilling to me to be able to do that, and to be able to get that family back to a state of wellness, and know that, okay, that's awesome. Now, this gentleman's adult son and grandchildren are able to have more years with him, even if I played a minor role in that. And so it really kind of moved me from this internal, let me just sink into my personal grief, into like, let me serve the moment in a better way, and be able to give back. So
I bet even things like choosing the colors and the name and all that was almost therapeutic in your grief / acceptance process and all that. You're kind of like thinking through things. And
yeah, very much so.
How mature is the patient advocate industry? Is that newish? And how is the healthcare industry? Are they accepting of that person in the medical team?
Yeah, it's still very much in its infancy. And, it kind of trickled. There's some patient advocates who, say they've been sort of doing advocacy since, maybe 2009, 2010. But it hasn't really become like it just recently became a board certification, which I honestly, I haven't even done it because I have a little bit of a sense of exhaustion over how many letters we need to have after our name to say that we are qualified to do something. So I have not done that just because it's not important to me. I know the work that I do, but there is a certification board, and that's very recent, last couple years. Yes.
A state board?
You can be board certified patient advocate. It's not a licensure like a state pharmacist licensure. It's more just a
certificate, kind of
like a BCPS kind of a thing. So it's, it's becoming more established. It's becoming more accepted, more acknowledged, more validated, more credible, but there still is so like to take the certification test, you don't have to have any specific degree. You don't really have to show any certain amount of hours of patient care. Like you really could just take it. And so a lot of it goes into like ethics of patient care and stuff. So it's not nearly as, niched and specific as a pharmacy exam, but so the door is open to the background of the person that goes into this type of a field. So there are many like administrators who become patient advocates. There are many nurses. I would say nursing is probably one of the bigger fields that end up going into this. Pharmacy, very, very small, very low percentage of pharmacists currently in the space. And there's some patients who become patient advocates, that they have had such a complicated, lengthy journey that they just want to get into the space to help in whatever capacity that is. And so you've got just this amazing pool of people who have come into this for very genuine, authentic reasons, usually based on a personal experience. And, the trick now is there's not a lot of awareness, right? Like we're having this conversation, but there's not a whole lot of awareness yet. It's getting heightened a little bit, but there's not a lot of awareness that I'm even as a patient able to type in let me search for a patient advocate. There are some hospital systems and facilities that employ what's called patient advocates, maybe nurse navigators, but the fact is they are employed by that facility. So there's going to be some bias. There's going to be some protection of the facility and of the staff there. And that's different than a private patient advocate.
When does the profession get so big that it's already there, that there's already patient advocates, but now you're like, no, we're the patient advocate. You know what I mean? And then pretty soon, let's say someone in your position says, I'm getting good at this, and now I'm going to have, 500 of my own patient advocates and so on. Well, ultimately, you know what happens. It turns into a bigger business. And then someone like you has to come along and kind of like be better than the person that was like you that now has 500 employees and not doing the same job that you do. So is that like a never ending cycle, or where does it stop where we say, no, I'm really your advocate? Where does that stop?
Yeah, so the patient advocate and nurse navigators and those types of titles that are within bigger organizations and hospital systems are intended to kind of, be the point person, like if I can't get a hold of my doctor and I'm going through a chemo regimen or something. And so they're kind of the point person, but they are not going to be the person who's going to say, oh, this isn't going well, or, oh, you noticed an error, or, oh, you want to leave this system. Let me help you navigate to the next system. I mean, ultimately, their interests are of their employer, which is that system. And so they can help you navigate within that system, but they're most likely not going to be the first ones to point out errors in their own system. So there's just going to be some biases that there's no way to help that. There's going to be some conflicts of interest there, although they serve an amazing purpose. So I do not want to downplay that. There are, countless people that I've interviewed on my own podcast that are like, if I didn't have that nurse navigator. So they serve an important purpose. But a private patient advocate, like what I do and what others do, is I have no interests other than yours. I have no goals other than the goals that you tell me. And I have no problem speaking up to this facility or that facility or moving you to a different facility because my only interest is yours, and I have no bias. I have no boss to speak to. I work for myself, and there's just there's a different level when that's the case. And, people really appreciate that. Now, will in the future some national conglomerate, eat up all the, start to employ all the patient advocates and it becomes this big business? I don't know. I don't know what the future of that holds, because in anesthesia, these things happen over the years. When there's there's private practice anesthesia groups and national groups start eating those groups up. And that can happen. I don't know if that will happen in this space. I think we're still far out from that. There's not a whole lot of interest on the big business side in us little patient advocates. Will that change? Maybe. Maybe that will change. But there's so many of us who like having the flexibility of making those decisions. And that's a lot of what we disliked in the box that we were in our jobs. So, like I don't have anybody to report to of what, can I say this or can I, proceed in this direction? I just do what's right for the patient. That's ethically still sound and that is in their interest.
Yeah. And there's some companies that have pulled that off, or I haven't checked lately, but like Consumer Reports, when you think of them, that's their first thing. Like, we're non-biased, we're private, we don't take any of this and that kind of thing. So if a company does that right, it doesn't necessarily have to be small to do that right. It can get bigger as long as their, let's say, privacy is a main thing, as long as they put that forefront in their ideals and their marketing or communication. They can probably still maintain that, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that absolutely it could, and there's not always a downside to something getting bigger. If we had a lot of, when I first started this and I started looking at the websites of a bunch of patient advocates just to kind of get an idea of what everybody was doing and where everybody was from and what was going on. A good 60-ish% at that time of the websites I clicked on were no longer in existence. So there is this side of, okay, we're so small, we're still so much in our infancy that a lot of us can't survive if we don't have another source of income in our household. So we want to stay small, but we also realize that the financial stability of this, it's feast or famine like any other business that you start. Like there are months when I've got a handful of, good amount of clients, and there's months when maybe it's a slow month and I don't have any clients. And so, can that person survive? Do we need a bigger system to support that? And we'll see how it plays out. But it is difficult to have this, be your only source of income. I see a lot of patient advocates who would change the life of so many people, but they cannot financially survive if this is their only source of income. So it's, it's a tough, and that's true of, any industry, it's hard starting out. So
I've typically liked to get heating and air conditioner guys or lawn sprinkler guys or something who are not with these bigger companies that, in my paranoia, think that they're always out to screw me, and then a year later, they're not there anymore because he's got a bad back or something came up with his family or something like that. So that's when you start wanting a little bit bigger structure of a business and maybe marketing and, someone for the book works and all that kind of stuff. Then you start wanting that bigger company again. So it's hard for an individual to do that on their own, certainly. Mm-hmm. What kind of stuff do you do that you might not tell the patient?
Well, interesting that you asked that, because there's not a whole lot, honestly. There's not a whole lot that I am afraid to tell them. I think it's actually really important that they know that on my intake form and their sort of, onboarding form is listing all of their physicians. And that is actually a routine practice that I check on the licensure of their physicians. That's public information. And so it's not like it's difficult to find, but they wouldn't know to look that up. And so I look to see if there's any disciplinary actions on that person's license. And I would say there hasn't been any that I have found that have been an existing relationship with a physician, but there have been patients who have said, hey, I'm considering this this stem cell treatment, and this is the doctor who is saying that. And then when I researched that physician who they were looking to potentially establish with, I'm like, I don't know about this. This is what I found. So I have no problem telling them that. There's not a whole lot that, I'm a pretty open book. I think it's important for them to know exactly what's going on, because they've already gone through a system that largely is not as transparent as it should be. And they're not hiring me to be another person that they've already seen. They're not hiring me to be a clone of what's already happened. They're hiring me because nothing's gone right and they don't know what else to do. And so I really respect that. And I respect that they can handle the fact that I need to tell them what's going on. Now, there's times when I'm listening for, they may think that, oftentimes the assumption is that this doctor, isn't treating me right, or this doctor doesn't care about what happens to me. There's a lot, because the system is so broken. The assumption immediately is the provider does not care about me. And I tried to explain to them that, here's the situation. I get that that's how it feels. I really do understand that because I was there. But these, in large part, these physicians don't go into medicine because there's some amazing plot at the end of the rainbow and they could care less about caring for people. I mean, of course, there's always going to be bad apples anywhere, but and so once I start getting involved and I start talking to those physicians and providers, I realize often that there's just been a disconnect. There's been, the way that somebody may have approached saying something might have seemed to the patient or the patient's family member that, we just don't care and we have no options, when really I'll get a completely different story just in my approach and the way that I'm able to interact with that provider. And so a lot of times, all the time, communication ends up being a factor, whether it's the primary factor or one of the factors. But at no point, I can't honestly think of any time when I have discovered something I am fully transparent. If I find out that your physician has a disciplinary action, you need to know that. You need to, because it's going to be hard for me to make the case to you that a different medical team might be in your better interest if you don't know that that's what went into my assessment. So there's not many times, what I would say more often than not happens is when I'm listening to what they're telling me and I actually start digging in, I start to see the disconnects. And I tread lightly on that. I don't want to say, oh, well, no, you have this wrong because you misunderstood. But rather, let me get involved in this and start to clean up this communication journey and see if we can get a little bit more clarity on what they're trying to say, what you're trying to say, and why that isn't coming together. But no, there are, I can't think of any times when I have discovered something that I haven't actually shared with them. You're
not coming in probably when they say, Claudia, come on in. Hey, let me introduce you to all my favorite nurses and my doctors here. And you're coming in because things have gone wrong.
Crisis mode.
Always, right? Or practically always. Nobody says, Mom's got her, stage 1 cancer. This is going to get bad. So let's line up Claudia and the doctor. You're coming in last, right, during the crisis.
Yes. And that is what I hope to shift a little bit. It would be great if people had the awareness to say, oh, I've just got this scary diagnosis. I anticipate a difficult journey. Let me have somebody alongside holding my hand. That is not what happens. And that's not the fault of the patient. It's just people don't know that this even exists. What typically happens is they get to a point where nothing is going right. Who do I go to next? And then Google starts to okay, maybe they put in, I need help on my medical. I don't know what they put in, but then some things pop up and maybe they start to learn that, oh, a patient advocate is a thing. And then they start searching for patient advocate. So it becomes a search in the midst of a crisis. And it would be really amazing if we could move that pendulum a little bit earlier on in the process, but we're not quite there yet in the majority of cases. But yeah, so I'm usually jumping in the fire. I'm usually if you call me, there's usually a fire that needs to be put out.
If you had to put out a marketing piece, let's say that someone says, Claudia, you cannot do crisis. You only have to do pre-crisis. What kind of marketing would you do? And what kind of things would you say? We're not going to call it pre-crisis. We're going to call it everything's great. So let's get a patient advocate. What kind of things would you say about that in terms of the value that you would provide way early?
Yeah, the way that I typically put it is we have learned many things throughout our life, just based on society, what we're taught. We are taught to prepare for a lot of things. We're taught to prepare for interviews. We're taught to prepare for, a lot of things in life. And we don't think to prepare for potential health issues. We hope for the best, and we all hope for the best.
Yeah.
And we try to do the best to hopefully nourish our bodies. But the reality is there is a good potential that we will experience some type of a health crisis in our lifetime, or a family member will. And what are we doing to plan for that? So we go into our financial advisor's office and we say, help me prepare for retirement. Am I prepared for retirement? When they go through all their numbers and they figure out if you're prepared for retirement, if you stay on the path that you're on. And so we are projecting already into our, if we're in our 30s or 40s, we're already projecting into our retirement years in our 60s and 70s about our money situation. And at no point outside of purchasing life insurance, and maybe if you're lucky enough to know about long-term care insurance, outside of those two, there's not a whole lot of preparation. You're preparing like, okay, if I die, I'll leave a lump sum of my money to my family. If I need a healthcare facility to help me or an at-home, I'll purchase some long-term care insurance. But that's it. That's literally it. So what about the rest of it? What about your navigation through the system when you have nobody in your family who is medically trained? What about the fact that you don't know how to navigate this system, and you don't know if you're getting the best care, and you don't know the questions to ask? Great that you're insuring yourself, but what are you doing to prepare beyond insuring yourself? And so there have been a very small amount of times when I've had people call, which is fantastic. Hey, I just want to know what you do because I would really love to know that I could depend on you if something happened. And I'm like, that's amazing. That's cool. Amazing. Yeah.
What about the section then between, all right, we just got mom back from the doctor, and we just found out today our wonderful doctor came up and sat us down and told us this devastating news. There's no problem though. What about that area in there? And this is more of from a marketing, business standpoint. We talked about like the future. What about like the present? But everything's going well, but we have a diagnosis. I imagine there's steps there that you would be able to help with too. Like you say, finding a doctor and doing this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. What I like to say is
pre-crisis.
Yeah. Pre-crisis, I use the acronym PLAN. Like what is your provider? Who's your medical team? And maybe you're so early on in the process that you like only have your primary care doctor and you don't need anything else right this minute. But who is your provider list right now, and what prospects do you have? Are you living in some rural town where you have no access to an endocrinologist or a cardiologist? And if so, what's the closest? Is it 2 hours away? How far is this person if you needed to see a specialist? And are you able to get to that person? And it's good to know that before you need to know that. I have had clients come from very rural towns that have had to seek hospital systems well outside of their area because the care was so poor. And then subsequent to that, they made informed decisions to move because this no longer serves me. It's great to live out in the country, but it may not help you when you need a good medical team. Because the reality is most medical professionals who are like at the height of their career are not going to work in a rural town. Now, there always is going to be exceptions to that rule, but at the height of their career, they're going to work in academic centers. Maybe as they start to retire and they're slowing down, they move out, to the country but at the height of their career, and maybe that's not important to you, but I would argue that if you need good medical care, you're going to get better medical care by going to providers who are at the height of their medical career. But in any case, P is sort of the providers. What's your provider pool right now? Who is your provider right now? Do you feel good about that provider? Is it a good, solid foundation for you? And do you have access to specialists if you need them? Maybe you never need them. Awesome. But let's think through that first. And then L and A are like your liabilities and assets, just as you would talk to a financial advisor. What are your medical liabilities and what are your medical assets? How is your situation right now? Do you have the insurance in place? Do you have a polypharmacy concern right now that you didn't know was a concern? What are some of your liabilities and what are some of your assets? Do you have relatively great positive family history and you have access to all that you need, and to just kind of pairing that out. And then N is just your needs. What would be your needs? Do you, have a pretty strong cardiac family history? You don't have that right now, and you don't have anywhere to go to get a cardiologist. What might be your needs? And so that can be talked about well in advance of any problem. So, it does not have to be when waiting till crisis mode.
We've got this hotel in town where they made this really fancy sign. It was called, let's just say it was called, Weeks In or something like that. A really fancy sign. I said to my wife, what the hell does that say? It's purple and black. I can't even make it out. What does that say? About a week later, I drive by and this thing is in dark black letters on white and it says Weeks In. And it's just like the gaudiest, simple sign. And I'm picturing like this fight at the hotel between management. And one of them says, what the hell did you do with that sign? I can't even read it. And the guy said, I'll show you a sign, So he comes out with this just, gaudy sign. But I know everybody's professional, but in my mind, I'm always thinking, what if I piss someone off? Yeah, they're going to be professional still, but what if it gets worse instead of better? That kind of thing. So that's why the communication things are huge for me. With that said, though, I imagine you're also helping with insurance problems and insurance fights and prior authorizations for stuff and getting in that mess too, or not?
I did a lot of that as a pharmacist, and I have no problem fighting with insurance. If the client is coming to me with a sole need of insurance fighting, I typically will find somebody else who that's their thing.
Good for you.
Just don't. This is the thing when you own a business, that's not where I look to primarily help, and I don't think my knowledge and skill set is fit to that perfectly. Now, I have fought with many an insurance company. I have no problem doing that. That's not my thing. So if that pops up in the middle of a medical crisis, I will help, but that will not be my primary focus.
Can you piece that out to somebody if that popped up as a huge thing during this association with somebody?
Yeah. So there are plenty of, I was mentioning that directory in the beginning. There are plenty of other patient advocates who like to focus on billing and insurance, and more power to them, because that's not something I love.
But if that comes up, Claudia, in your association with someone, can you still be like the gatekeeper? Do you have anybody that can help you while you're helping a family? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you ever get some of those people kind of underneath you, or you sub it out to them and then bring it back in?
Yeah, I would sub that out. Now, there is a business model in which a person it's kind of like a general contractor, right? You pay me and I pay them. And I haven't chosen to do it that way as a general contractor approach. There's nothing wrong with that. I think people do that and it works just fantastic. I would rather that person have a direct relationship with that's just the way I approach it. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. But there are people who do the other model, which is, I'm the overarching, general contractor, and I will connect you to that person, but ultimately you still pay me. I will pay that person.
You also have it where you could still remain the patient advocate, and they could actually hire out almost like another billing person to help. So they could almost have 2 of you or 3 of you, right?
Yeah, they certainly could. I haven't really come into a situation where that's been necessary.
Gotcha.
Because if they come to me right out of the gate with, I have this billing issue, I already know that I'm not the person. Normally they're coming to me and it's okay, I always do an initial consultation, kind of a discovery call that's free. So I'll know right out of the gate, I'm, a great choice, but I'll let you know that there's a lot of people that you could choose from. Here's how I would approach this scenario. Perfect. If down the road some insurance glitch comes up and I can manage it, awesome. I will still do that. But if it's a huge, now we're uncovering hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical then that's not going to be me.
Most of the times you're coming in as a medical issue, and the odds of a huge insurance thing popping up out of the blue
pretty low
after already this are probably low.
Yeah.
You probably know a lot of that already.
Yeah. So, so it, I usually know right out of the gate if it's somebody that I should connect with another advocate who is more focused on billing issues, which is why that discovery call is so important, because sometimes, they're calling me and it's I just need transportation to my doctor's office, and I'm I can absolutely find you that. That's not me, but I can find you that. So, yeah.
What about that chunk, that time period then when things are starting to wrap up? Let's say, unfortunately, someone has died. Do they ramp up? Do they ramp down because of hospice and stuff? And when do you finally end your I imagine you never end the association, but when do you the curve starts to flatten out for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to knock on lots of pieces of wood that none of my clients have died. But that doesn't mean that, I've necessarily been the sole person saving their life. It just means that maybe I've guided them to the care that they needed. But there's plenty of time. The goal is for them to be able to reclaim their own voice and start to manage this at some point. So that's my goal.
Gotcha.
I kind of look at it as a coach, right? If I'm going to get a business coach, I shouldn't 10 years from now still be talking to that same business coach. At some point I should have been able to take the reins, right? And so the goal is, okay, at the beginning, I'm going to hold your hand as much as you need and as much as you want me to. And then I'm going to slowly start to sort of retrain your mindset of, okay, I can ask questions, and I could look for another doctor. And so we're just chipping away at some of these things that we have learned that we need to unlearn. And then eventually we're to the point where maybe we are in a better state of health and we're just kind of smooth sailing to the point where they think they can manage, they feel good managing it, but they know they can also call me at any time. So if they're a huge bump along the road, they know they can still call me, and I can kind of walk them through it, either walk them through how to handle it, or I can get back into the hand-holding mode if necessary. But the goal is not to have me, I should not be micromanaging this forever.
Gotcha.
Not because I wouldn't be happy to do that. I would love to help people, but I think the best way I can help people is to help them to start to know how to advocate for themselves.
Do people ever come to you with different goals? Like one person might say, my goal is to get the best care and things like that. Do you ever have a thing where, I don't know, I can't even think of an example. Someone said, I've been a real jerk to this medical team and I want to let them know that this was just stress and I understand what they're doing now and I want to repair this. I can't even think of the question. Is there ever a goal besides the goal of that? At first I was going to ask, because you don't take them till they're ending, their death. I thought some people might say, look, I want the goal to be no more friction and I just want to die in peace. You've already explained your goal is not to do that, it's to lift them up. Are there ever any different goals than that? I
haven't had anybody come to me with that sort of palliative care goal, but that's that may be because what they're looking for at that point is more of a death doula, which is a fantastic, amazing service. They may not come to a patient advocate for that reason. They may come to somebody who is more in tune to the needs and services surrounding sort of the dying process. So what I typically do is in my intake and onboarding process is I ask people to tell me their 3 goals. And I think what often happens, as happens with us, I think in a lot of facets of life, is, oh, well, nobody's asked me that before, So I think they take a little bit of time to really think through, oh, well, what do I really want? What do I really want, out of this venture and relationship with Claudia? And they actually do end up getting relatively specific. Maybe it's, I want to, make sure that I have a good medical team here, but that I'm also seeking out as many options as I possibly can that are maybe outside of my area that I didn't know about. Maybe it's this very rare condition and I feel okay with what I got now, but I feel like there may be something out there that I don't know about. And so they start to get more specific. And that's really helpful to me because I might come in and I might have some goals based on what I think could, be helpful. But if that's not their goal, that's not serving them. The medical system is kind of built around the medical system knowing what goals should be. That's what it's built around. And that's part of the reason why it doesn't serve as well as it could, because, oftentimes we do things out of, a CYA, a litigation, and that's unfortunate. It's the reality though. There's, all kinds of reasons why litigation is so high in the medical profession. So a lot of the decision making that we make can be out of, here's what I would want to do from a humanitarian standpoint, but then if I do that, then would I get sued later because I didn't do this, which is standard of care? And then how would that hold up in court? And so, all of these things where like, I just want to know what is your goal? What do you want out of this? And once they're given the space, like somebody actually asked me that, I think back to when my dad was sick and the only person who ever actually asked him, how are you dealing with this, was a registered dietitian that I got to talk to him at one point, who wasn't even really part of his medical team. It was just like an ancillary appointment that I made for him. And I'm like, you know what? Nobody's actually asked him, how are you doing? They'll ask, how are you doing with the side effects or how, but how are you doing as a person that's going through chemo? So that's kind of how I feel, is giving them the space to say, what do you really want? And you're allowed to have a say in that.
I'm in Grand Rapids, but rural from here, let's say 20 miles. I have some friends who are physicians and they say some of those people 20 miles from here, they live not in the city for a reason. Some of them want a different life of not being as whatever. For better, for worse, not being as open with their healthcare privacy and not wanting this and not wanting that. Yes, there can be totally different angles of someone saying, look, Claudia, here's this crisis and I'm trying to get to Mayo, to do all this kind of stuff or whatever, clinics and so on that you mentioned. And someone else says, no, I want the best that can be done in this little hospital, or something like that.
Yeah.
They have different goals of that.
Yeah.
That was interesting when you mentioned
academic institutions. Yeah. Academic hospitals.
And at the top of their career, doctors want to be there. Why is that?
Medical school and residency is insanely rigorous. I don't think that that's in question, but you kind of like can't appreciate that unless you've actually seen somebody go through it. It's very rigorous. And so when you're done, you don't necessarily, well, let's just take anesthesia for example, because that's in my world. You could go to a very rural place where you are doing anesthesia for colonoscopies all day. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's needed. But you aren't going to come from your rigorous training. And as you exit your training and you're kind of like, getting to the peak of your career, you aren't going for bread and butter cases that are super slow and don't challenge you. You need to be challenged because if you start going to that route, that's your route. Like you can't go back. You can't go back to rigorous because your next employer is going to say, well, you've been doing bread and butter cases in a rural town. You're not going to go now do, a heart transplant. So, you've got this journey that a lot of providers, and of course, there's always going to be exceptions, but you've got this journey that a lot of providers, physicians will take that is like, okay, well, I just got out. I'm at the, I know the most I'm ever going to know. I took my board, I'm as book smart as I can be. And I want to go out and be challenged in the cases that I do. And then you go through this, this part of life that's sort of, you peak of your career. And then maybe, I don't know, a couple decades down the road, you're like, I think I'm ready to start slowing down. And, maybe I want to move out to the rural areas. And it's not that those doctors are bad. They're not bad. They're still great doctors, but they're on the tail end of their career. They're slowing down. They're retiring. You've got this crisis. You want to be with somebody who is like, I'm just packed with knowledge and experience. Let me approach this. That's how I would want.
That's interesting. And when you say academia, is that always because they're studying and they're on the newest edge? Would it ever be another hospital that's not associated with academia, but is still very progressive like that? Or is it usually always associated with school/training/academia institutes?
Yeah, so they aren't always necessarily like public institutions like the University of Florida is, but most of the time you're dealing with an institution that has some role in training the next generation. As long as that
gotcha.
Institution has some kind of a residency rotation, or they don't necessarily have to have a medical school, but if they're taking any role in training the next generation, they have to be at the top of their game because they have to teach all of the new things, all of the, they're constantly having to be at the top of their game. And if they don't have to be at the top of their game, then they don't. And that's okay too. That's a decision that you make as a professional of like, okay, well, I'm kind of getting tired of that. Let me start to slow down by going here. But who do you want? That's the question you have to ask yourself is, if I've got this diagnosis that's scaring me, I personally would rather have somebody who is at the top of their game, who is teaching the next generation, who is required to stay on top of this and who has a robust research, right? Like those institutions are doing the research. They are the ones coming out with the journal articles that the other doctors are reading. I would want to know who those people are and who's doing the research on my condition, who's at the top of that world and where can I go? And that's typically going to be an academic institution. And if it's not, it's a private institution that's got some kind of a role in training the next generation.
Did I use the wrong name when I said hospice? Is there a better name for that?
Hospice is the service that is provided to people who have a terminal diagnosis and typically are, X amount of months to the end of their life, 4 to 6 months. And now there's also palliative care, which can go on for many years. So that is still not fully understood. A lot of people pair those two together and they're not the same. Palliative care is assisting that person who maybe has kind of a pretty serious diagnosis, but is not nearing the end of their life and may be able to utilize the palliative care service for many years. Hospice is basically, when you're told you're going to hospice, you're given a very terminal short-term prognosis. Now,
what's that one that you mentioned though, Claudia?
Death doula. So we kind of know of doulas. It's DOULA. We know of doulas in the space of like midwifery and that kind of thing. But there is a great service that is taking on more heightened awareness too, called Death Doula, which is so fantastic because just as a birth doula or a midwife would walk you through the birthing process, a death doula is walking you through the death process. So if a loved one is in the process of dying, there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we don't know about a lot of things until we go through them. So, what is this process going to look like? And who, yes, I have hospice and I can call them and that's great, but there's so many other things that go along with death, like what do I need to know about, the financial part? What do I need to know about the actual death itself? And who do I call? How do I arrange for the service and do I do cremation? What are the pros and cons of that? And, there's so many things.
Kind of what you're doing, but just shifted after the crisis. And now you're looking at that side of it. Claudia, from a business standpoint, which is always hard to talk about when you're just got done talking about death, but being our business of pharmacy podcast, from a business standpoint, what struggles do you have in the business where you say, because I know your sister was able to help the web, and we talked about maybe not having the support and having a one person wearing all the hats and so on, but what are your biggest struggles now that you have to become a business person along with your skills?
The flow of clientele is always a struggle, I think, for a lot of business owners, but it's no different in patient advocacy. And I think even maybe heightened because, if I were to start a lawn care business, especially in Florida, like pretty much 100% of this area is going to have some type of a lawn care service. So, if I differentiate myself a little bit, I'll probably have a decent client flow. Because you've got like 100% of people need lawn care, right? In the patient advocacy space, this is a luxury service that is not covered by insurance. So, you're starting to pare down, right? You're starting to filter. Okay. It's the people who know to look for a patient advocate, who know what a patient advocate is. And then it's the people who can afford a patient advocate's services because it's going to be private pay. So you've got this like filter that starts to filter down a much smaller pool of people. And so keeping that flow is, it's a struggle for all of us in this space. And, we are all very aware of that. A lot of it is awareness, just that we even exist and what the types of things are that we do and how we can help people. And then it's also the shift that I already mentioned, which is, okay, I'll call her, but I'll call her when I'm in crisis mode. And then that's another filter, right? So that's great that I know that she's there. Okay, I have the financial means to hire her. But I don't need her until I have no other options. And so you filtered all the way down to a very small percentage of people, and we can help much further, earlier in the process. So it's just, it's a lot of just this, having conversations and people knowing that there are people who can help you and you don't have to be in crisis mode. And honestly, it's much better if you call us before you're in crisis mode. So it's, that's a big challenge. And a lot of us, like I mentioned, the people that are going into this business, we aren't coming from an MBA type of a background. We aren't coming from, corporate anything, maybe corporate pharmacy, but we don't come from a world of business. So we know how to work in our business. We don't know how to work on our business. Nobody has taught us that. And we don't come into this with an excessive amount of money to be able to hire coaches. And even if we did hire coaches, we aren't able to hire the patient advocate guru because there isn't one. We can hire somebody with general business knowledge, which is fantastic. But most of them don't know a whole lot about the healthcare space. And so there's a lot of barriers there. So yeah, those are some of the challenges.
And are you always local? In other words, I imagine you have to have these face-to-face conversations. Well, let's say without COVID, you have to have these face-to-face conversations. Is that right? Or am I missing anything that you were able to help somebody from, calling you from Washington State while you're down in Florida?
Yeah, I definitely help people outside of the area. When I first started, it was kind of like, okay, this is well pre-COVID. So, I wanted to have feet on the ground, but I slowly began to realize that people would call me from out of the area. And sometimes, all they really wanted was like an hour or 2 hour consultation with the family of here's the scenario. I don't know how to approach this. How do I start to communicate effectively? And I can absolutely talk you through that. I also have an electronic medical record system that allows for telehealth. So I often will meet, and honestly, through COVID, even if they were local, I would meet them through telehealth. And so we can talk through, they can upload their labs, they can upload their documents, I can see it in their chart. And so it's very much, I mean, I can, if necessary, I have done this before, I can even be at the appointment on speakerphone. So you can literally bring me with your phone, put me on speakerphone, obviously letting the physician know there are different rules in different states for recording without their knowledge. So I always just default to let them know I'm here, like we're not doing anything that is like some secret thing.
You're not trying to spy on them or turn them into the boards or something like that.
Right. And, and I also do recommend to patients who don't necessarily want to pay for me to be in the room to record it if their physician is okay with that. Like don't do it without letting them know. But it's helpful to have a recording, not so you can put it on TikTok or whatever, but so that you can just have it later to say, oh my gosh, I missed like half of that conversation. I was so like, he said the words XYZ and it was like, wah, 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 wah after that. Well, now I can re-listen to it. Note taking is very helpful too, but a lot can be done remotely.
Are the doctors open to recording usually or not?
What I tell my patients is, if it is a hard no without a very clear reason why, like this, my facility has a hard stop against it. If it's just a hard no, like no, you can't record me because, then to me, that's a red flag. Because what are you saying why are you worried about what you're saying? If I'm telling you like, wouldn't you like me to be able to review what you said? Isn't a lot of the frustration on the physician side that, I'm like, okay, now let me say the same thing again next time because you didn't hear me the first time. Wouldn't it be really great if they could just hear it again? So unless there's a really good reason, like the facility does not allow for that, why is it a no? So I say, if it's a no, you have to respect that, but that's a red flag.
Just because it's a facility overarching rule, well, that's a red flag if the whole
Correct.
facility is like that. And it might even be a red flag if the doctor's saying it. It's like almost everything could be a red flag with that.
Yes. Yeah. And I get that, some facilities have just been sued more than others. And it's not always, litigation is not always justified. So there can be lots of times when there are multiple lawsuits and it's just, there was an angry patient who didn't get their way. And so I get that. And because of sometimes the heavy litigation, decisions are made like that, overarching decisions. I would say in the majority of cases, my patients have not run into that. Occasionally they'll run into a hard stop no, and I'll just say, okay, we're going to take that as a red flag. If this doesn't feel right to me. So, ultimately, I always tell them this is your decision. I never tell a patient to fire a doctor. I suggest that, okay, let's look at this as a red flag. Ultimately, it's your decision to move on or not. But I'm just letting you know that there should not be a concern for you to be able to take this home because ultimately, this is instructions to you that even if you put this live on Facebook, even if you did with it what they don't want you to do, what are they saying that they're worried about? This is not a HIPAA breach when you have shared it. So, what is it that they're concerned about?
You probably don't give the patient all that, right? Though you don't say if it's no, it means this. You just say ask, and then they come back and tell you, and then you get to think about it and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, because each situation's different. With anything else, it's like...
It might just be, no, I'm not comfortable. I'm an old guy. I don't want it recorded.
And how they say it also, if it's coming from an immediate defense, it's like, all right, the defense approach is all right, that doesn't, how did they say it? What was the scenario? What was the context? And let's make a decision based on that.
It almost makes you think I could offer that to some patients. Like if I'm talking to them in the pharmacy for like 2 minutes, I could say, hey, I could record, if you ever want me to record this, 100%. Let me know and I'll email it to you, something like that.
Yeah.
So Claudia, in your wildest dreams, starting this up, do you always like this one-on-one or do you say, I want to be this where I've got all of these people doing this for me and you're up here? Do you ever have, not that you should by any means, because most people in your position might say, no, I want to be one-on-one with someone. And if I grow this, that's not going to happen. Where do you fall in that? Are you always like one-on-one writing this out, or do you picture having 20 Claudias working for you and you're doing this or that?
What I picture long-term, which I'm also I'm working really hard on my spiritual journey to surrender the need to make any of this happen because I didn't come into pharmacy school to do this. So the fact that this is how I'm very open to the way that I am, the way that life's flow takes me. But I do envision, and as soon as I started this, I had pharmacists coming to me, okay, so when are you hiring? And I'm like, I am not to that point yet. So there's definitely not a shortage of pharmacists who would like a shift, but I would love to have an organization that has pharmacists, and I would love to make it pharmacists only, just because I love the profession, and I know that so many of us have a love for doing passionate work. And so I would love to have pharmacists under me who take their own clients. At no point do I want to get to the point where it's a phone tree and today you have me and tomorrow you have, Mary, and the next day you have Alicia, and you will still have your individual advocate. But if and when I get to the point where I cannot take on the patient load, I would love to say, okay, I have other advocates, but that you are paneled to that person. That is your person. And because at no point do I want this to look like the broken system. The whole point of it is to have that approach that okay, I'm sick of that. I want something different, and I don't want you to have to have a scenario that you feel like you're in the same position. So that's what I envision. I also envision being fully happy doing it individually. I would like to speak to larger groups to start to get the word out of how to start to advocate for yourself. Even if you don't hire somebody, I think that there's a lot of messaging here that can get to people that even if they don't hire a patient advocate. So I would love for there to be a shift. And I have big lofty dreams, but I also am okay being just me.
Bam, this goes. And let's say you have X hours a week to work on this, or you want to work on this. Let's say it's 20 or 40 or 80, whatever it is. What percent would you like to still be, I'm Claudia, I'm working one-on-one with these people because I like talking to the doctors and doing this, versus I'm Claudia and I'm working on the marketing and doing this for this people that are working in your operation? What percent would you do both of those? Would you say, I want it 50-50, or no, I've always dreamed of doing this big administration thing, I want it 90-10? What percent would you be individual versus working on a bigger company?
I really don't have any desire to do a lot of that work. If I got to that point, I would love to farm that out to somebody who's better at doing that. That doesn't involve direct patient care. I do a little marketing here and there, but that's not my forte, and it's not something that I would say that is my strength. And so I would love to get to the point of like farming some of that out. I also would love to get to the point where I'm maybe 50% direct patient care and 50% making bigger waves on a bigger scale, like actually being proactive. Like, okay, I would love to be a consultant, to a physician's office to like start to pinpoint, making big, because I see that I'm making great strides in these individual people's lives, which is fantastic. But I also know that there are potentials to make much bigger impacts on other parts of the system.
We want to stay away from that administration stuff.
I definitely do, yes.
We don't like that.
I don't. And I don't want to dislike my business. I mean, I get that there's always stuff we do that we like. I don't enjoy doing taxes, but I know I have to do them. I don't enjoy doing the bookkeeping, but I know I have to do them. But I would also love to send that to somebody who loves to do that.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you don't want to dislove that. You mentioned that it's a lot of nurses doing this. Do you ever see yourself, talking business-wise again, do you ever see yourself being a consultant to other patient advocates that don't have the pharmacy know-how? You could teach all these, let's say it's 90% nurses doing this or something, or non-pharmacists, let's say. You can teach that 90% the right questions and the right things to look for as a pharmacist doing that.
Yeah, we're all already kind of coming together in this space and identifying, individual strengths and weakness, almost like a co-op homeschool situation, So yeah, and it's really great because, I'm in a smaller group where it's like, hey, I have this situation, I haven't come across this, and there's always those things. It's like random things come up that patients need that we're like, oh, that's something new for me, And so, yeah, I think it's fantastic I think it's actually a really great thing that we all come from different backgrounds and have different strengths, because then we can really help these patients in ways that we could not do with only our skill set. So, yeah.
Yeah, because someone could bounce something off of you and it might take you 5 minutes to answer, and it might take them 50 hours to research it all and come up with the same 5-minute answer you have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Claudia, where do people listen to your podcast?
So my podcast is called Minding Wellness, and a good branded person would have everything be the same name. And that's why this is not a skill of mine.
That's boring. It's boring.
So Minding Wellness is my podcast name. It's where all podcasts are found. It's also on my website, but it's called Minding Wellness. The whole point of it is how do we start being mindful of our wellness, like to bring it to the forefront instead of making it like, oh, I'll think about it when stuff hits the fan. So the whole point of it is to start being proactive. So I've had guests talk about all kinds of things that I wasn't even aware of, like hypnotherapy that I would have normally said was quackery because of my conditioning and indoctrination into the medical system. And so, we've talked about I recently had somebody come on talking about the fashion industry and how the textile industry is contributing to a lot of the toxicity in our environment and on the clothes that we wear and stuff. We don't even think twice. And these are things that I didn't think twice about the clothes that I wear. I try to pick stuff that feels good against my skin, but I'm not diving any deeper than that into that industry. And so it's all about just knowing a little bit more. And the more we know, the better choices that we can make for ourselves. It's not about becoming neurotic. I have no intention for anybody to listen and have now neuroses over all these topics, but it's like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. I didn't know that hypnotherapy was an option. I didn't know about halo therapy. I didn't know. And maybe it's something I want to pursue. So, yeah.
That's like my show, Claudia. We can talk about anything as long as we don't talk about medicine.
Yeah.
We have enough talk about that.
Right.
We want to learn some things. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, Claudia, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
And best wishes on things. And what a nice testament to your dad and the things that you're doing. So keep it up. Way to go.
Thank you. Honored to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
All right, Claudia, we'll talk again.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.